Hi, during this recording I'm going to introduce you to creating a search page in the workplace. The page we're going to recreate is this one. This search page just searches my content database, which is a set of Twitter tweets basically. They've been enriched, they've had language extracted from them, and they've been geolocated. And it runs much better when you click it twice for some really weird reason. But anyway, so to create this page is pretty straightforward. As you can see, you've got a search bar at the top, you've got a search pager, and a set of search results. On the left hand side you also have your search facets, and that's basically it for the page. So if we go to configure app, we'll nuke this one. Bam! There it goes. It's disappeared off the navigation down there. So we'll call this search, because we're highly imaginative. When you create that page, what you'll notice is you'll get another button here with search, but you'll see there's no page at the moment. That's because you have to absolutely provide a URL, and it must start with a / and end in .html5. I can't stress this enough. If you don't do that, it's not going to work, because that's how this application is built. So here, for example, if we call it search.html5, I can select the layout. So thin thick is thin on the left, thick on the right. There's 3 out of the box. These are pluggable at runtime, so you can write your own JavaScript file, drop it in there, and so long as that's in the page, that'll appear in your list. Pretty straightforward to add them. Very, very basic. Probably about 10 lines of code each, something like that. So thin thick, thick thin for the other way around, and column for a single column. But we're just going to go for thin thick today. So I'm going to drop my widgets on now. So the widgets I want are my search facets on the left, so drag that, and you see the cursor change, and drop it. And you see that we have the size by default for the lists, the extended size, and whether we let people click on all and show all the options, and whether we hide empty facets or not. So hiding empty facets is generally a good idea. I don't like them to appear if they've got no options. It just takes up screen space. So that's what I do there. On the right hand side we want the search bar, so drag and drop. So at the top, no options there because it's just a text bar, pretty straightforward. We want a search pager, so I'll drag that up and drop. Again, pretty straightforward, so don't need to configure it. And search results, drop that in. Here we see there is an append option here, so there is the concept of selected search results in the search context, and if you click on a result, so rather than a button saying open a result, but somewhere in the result, you can update the selection, and that could be either to select multiple results and then do something in another widget, or select a particular result and see maybe a preview of that in another widget. So that's why there's 2 modes. There's an append mode, so add it to the selection, and a replace mode, so just select this one. So that's why there's 2 modes. We're not really going to go into that today, we're just going to create a basic search page. But that's my page configured. Pretty straightforward, as you can see. What I then need to do is I need to link these all together, because they're going to be linked to the same search. So when one search executes, I want them all to update. When I click on a facet, it will update these ones. If I type in a search and hit go, it will update all the other ones. So I want to make sure that they're all linked together. To do this, I add a search context to the page. There are many type of contexts there. There's one that's sneakily added itself in there. Don't worry about that. That's in the next version of MLJS. The one we're going to talk about is search context, which is content search. There's also semantic context for Sparkle queries, whether that's a general find me a list of subjects or a very specific get me all facts for this one subject. There's a document context, so get me the properties, get me the content for this document, update the properties, set security, that sort of thing. A geo context for move here, I'm interested in this point in this area, go and update that, and that can contribute itself to a search query. So we'll talk about more of the others later, but today we'll just add a search context there. So if I click on that search context, I get a whole bunch of options. The first thing I'm going to do is register every widget on the page. The reason you don't have a search context that's default registered to everything is because you might have a dashboard type page where you've got different widgets on the page linked to different search contexts. So there could be one showing a summary of financial outputs, one showing the workload of a team. They're very much different searches, but you want them both on the same management page. So that's why you can have multiple contexts, multiple search contexts, and why you can register different widgets with them. But I'm going to select all widgets and link them all together. I can specify my options. So this is for JSON options. If I mouse over the titles, I see a description of what each one does. So I could paste in JSON search API options there. I'm going to leave it blank because I've already installed the search options, as you saw in the second video. So again, I could provide the options name here if I've saved one to the server. This defaults to all, not to default. And the reason for that is there's different REST endpoints, slightly different. You have to do question default rather than question options equals, which is a bit of a nightmare. So it defaults to all. You can specify a sort word if you want to override that. So typically it's called sort. You can have a default query in there. So this is default text query. You can specify that within the search context. So this is what happens when you hit search and there's nothing in your search bar. So this is not quite like an additional query. They're applied in the search options. This is what happens if you delete all the text, everything in there, what it reverts to. So it's subtly different from the query you run on the first page. We are going to run a query when the page loads, but that's not what this is for. This is for what happens when you submit an empty string. So we'll leave that for later. You can also specify things here that you can override dynamically that are also allowable in the search options. So I can dynamically override collections, directory transforms and formats, so I don't have to rely on the search options on the server. And this one's quite interesting. We'll go around this more when we start talking about dashboard pages, but for now it's enough to say that the same search API functionality, so take a set of options and a query and pass it to an endpoint, you might create a custom endpoint for. You might also use this to search for values for a co-occurrence rather than just to do a content search. But I'm going to do a content search, so I'm going to leave that as default, and because I'm doing a content search, no need to look up tuples, so I'm going to leave that there. So if I click save now, what that's going to do, it's going to save the page. As you can see, it gets updated with its URL, and if I click here, we see that the page URL goes there, and this application is clever enough to think, well, hang on a minute, this page doesn't actually exist, so I need to go off and load a workplace page and pass it this URL, and it will use the URL and it will go off and load the page. So here you see a facets window with nothing shown, an empty search bar, empty results here. Now the reason they're empty is because I've not told the page to do a default search. So if I click search, we see a summary search. Now we probably want to load this by default rather than force the user just to click search empty all the time. So let's go and do that. What I also want to do is maybe say, well, actually, there's more here and less and all. So you see there's quite a lot of functionality there, but maybe I want to probably cap that. That's quite a lot there, so maybe I'm not going to let people do all because it's a bit of a nightmare. I'm just going to limit it to, say, 10. So I'm going to configure the page and change a few options. So we're going to hide the show all. We're going to still hide empty facets. What we're going to do though is we're going to set an action on page load. So at the moment we only support on page load. In the future we might support random actions like document selected or things like that, but at the moment we've just got on page load. And really there's a whole bunch of things. It could be a function on your widgets or function on your context. So if we select these things, you'll see there's no functions there. But search context, there are a couple of functions. So there's do simple query and do structured query. So this is a text query, whereas this is a kind of JSON complex query like a CTS search. So I'm going to do simple query and I'm going to do a blank. So I could add a parameter in here, string parameter, but I'm actually just going to say, well, I'm going to call do simple query on search context 1 with no parameters. And then hit save. And the page will save and reload, and you see here that there's a more tab, but there's no all tab anymore. So I can view 10, or I can view 5, but I can't view absolutely everything in there, so that's the configuration taking place. We also saw that if we click on search, the search executes on page load. So that action that we configured actually executes that on page load. So quite a straightforward way of creating a search page. It only takes maybe a minute if you're not talking over it for a video. So I highly recommend that you try that out. Hope you found this useful.